Okay, good evening and welcome to another book-based interview where today we're talking to author Will Solomon. Will is an author who is also an English tutor in Thailand, using his experience in the US Air Force to create stories that highlight the themes of resilience and honor. If you guys are interested in following Will's journey, please check out his website at willsolomonauthor.com and his Instagram at will_Solomon author. Will, thank you so much for being here, buddy.
Yeah, for sure, man. It's a pleasure, and thank you for having me.
Dude, of course, of course. So I love asking this to any author that we have a chance to talk to for this interview show. But tell me your story and how you became an author. Like, I know that you had experience being in the U.S. military, the U.S. Air Force to be exact, and I know that kind of helped you understand what themes you wanted to implement in your stories. But if you just kind of like go in a little bit of detail to just explain like how'd you get to where you are now?
Yeah, for sure, man. Gosh, like I'm just trying to think like where's a good place for me to start right now. But I guess what I'll just start off by saying is just that like even before my military time, like I'd always been a writer. So I had just kind of found myself. I just had the natural tendency to just kind of want to start writing stories, or like short stories, and then even a little bit of poetry. And even after I went into the military, that was just something that I found myself doing, like just in my pastime. Um, and it was just kind of at at that point while I was in the military, like I wasn't really just ready to take it towards like publishing or being an author. Like I really just did it more as like I said, just a pastime or a hobby, more than anything else. And it wasn't actually till after I got out, where I made the decision to where I want to finally publish. And I eventually did, and I found out that just the whole writing process and the whole publishing process, it's a steep learning curve. And I'm just now realizing I think I'm about close to 3 years. Yeah, I think 3 years in now, where I'm just now starting to finally like figure things out, and just like what I need to do just to really become like a successful author. Especially given the fact that I'm an indie author, and probably a lot of authors you deal with on the platform as well are indie authors. And with that, it's just it's got its pros and cons, with just the fact that being an indie author is you're basically a business owner at that point. You're your own boss. You have some more flexibility, with how you want to do things, right? But at the same time, you're responsible for literally everything, costs included. So but it's nice because I feel like, since I've really pursued my authorship, it has given me, also a bit of a taste of, some entrepreneurship as well. So, like I said, it's been a really steep learning curve, but just the way I look at it is just like an overall big picture is I'm really just trying to enjoy the journey more than anything else, man. So.
No, that's such a great answer. And I think you're totally on the mark with what you were saying about how authorship also um, is a bit of entrepreneurship. Like, we've had a lot of authors come onto this interview podcast and also talk about, how when you depend on your own authorship to give you that income and to be a reliable source of like livelihood, you do have to take things onto your own hands where it's like, you do have to worry about costs and like publishing and marketing and pretty much any other facet of the business and stuff. And I think it is cool in the sense where you're right, like, being an author makes you a business person. And I think there's a little bit of strength that comes from that, from learning the game enough to where you're able to operate on your own and like understanding exactly what you need to do. But I think there's also a lot of cons as well, where I think there is a lot of frustration when you try to explore your creativity to a point where you're able to live off of it, I think that's like insanely hard. And there's a reason why a lot of people, don't really have that opportunity to do that. And that's why like the whole journey is just what it is. But I appreciate your honesty to kind of like say like, hey, I'm taking the indie route, and yes, it does come with some drawbacks, but for the most of it, like you're saying that you love the journey and you're enjoying the process behind it. And I think that's like key, because there's so many lines of like philosophy, or like just in general, some amazing advice we get is, if you worry too much about the destination, you're going to end up hating the journey. But if you like the journey, you're going to end up getting to the destination whenever you need to. But if you don't mind me asking, what was it about writing that kind of made you always want it to be kind of like your North Star on your compass? Like, it kind of seems like no matter what, writing was always something that you always gravitated towards. So, was there a reason behind that? Like, that just made you so inspired to pursue this?
Yeah, yeah. So I think really more than anything about writing, like how it really started out for me is, I mean, I'm more of I'm more of an introverted person in general, you know. I mean, there's times when like and it's not even I think the best way for me to put it is there is times when I choose to give out my energy,
Hmm.
right? Specific times, specific people. So like I'm very like conservative about who and what I give energy to. Um, but but really, I think more than anything, is just writing it is it's just it's like just kind of a cathartic experience for me, you know. And just you know, I just really it was just something that I really fell back on during some hard moments or hard times in my life, especially during some of my time in the military. And you know, without getting too specific about certain things, you know, I think just time in the service, like it demands a lot from you, you know, both mentally, physically, spiritually. And it's really, you know, one of the biggest things about it is it really almost kind of, I guess, brainwashes you into putting the organization first and foremost above all things, you know, even your family for that matter. And then just on top of that, you know, you can find yourself in these very remote locations for 9 months to a year at a time, you know, where gosh, man, you just like some of these places, it's like it's just almost like like time forgot it in a way, you know, and even to an extent like here in Thailand, right? Like where my parents are from here in Thailand, like I'm half Thai by the way. So
Cool.
but they're in the rural Isan region, right? And it's also pretty like remote too. So when I came back there for a while, I stayed there for about 4 months, but I just kind of felt like I was like deployed overseas again, basically. You know,
Yeah.
like it was a familiar setting for me, and even then during that time, you know, like I still fell back on my writing a lot just because there was an adjustment period that I was going through when I moved back over here. Just because typically, you know, like you move over to another country, right? And then there's kind of like this infatuation slash honeymoon phase, and it's kind of like being in a relationship, you
Yeah.
know. And then like once that's over, you know, like reality kind of like starts to sink in, right? And you're like, oh, like wait a minute, like I really am not in the U.S. anymore, you know. Um, but yeah, like I said though, it's really it's it's been difficult for me with writing just because you know it once started out as like I said something relaxing, something cathartic, right? And now like it's also a business for me too, so it can be a little bit hard to try to differentiate the two. And there was actually there's actually a period not that long ago where I took probably months off of writing anything. Just because, I mean, for one, like I was just so burnt out from it, and just like writing wasn't becoming fun for me anymore, you know? So, and I think it goes with like another thing, you know, how a lot of people will probably say, like, oh, you know, they want to, they wish they could do their hobby for a living, right? To try to escape the rat race and the 9 to 5 and all that stuff, right? And I hear people say that, and I'm just thinking now, like, I don't care for what you wish for, you know.
Mhm.
Um, but like I said, I mean that's just been one thing that I've really had to balance is with writing is just balancing between just writing because I enjoy it, and then just writing for more of like a like a business aspect. And what I found sometimes is that it's okay to take breaks from it,
Yeah.
for however long you need. And I started writing again here recently. I'm actually in the process of finishing my third book now, and I felt like that time off that I took from it it just had been really productive for me to kind of just, I guess, just to reset and refill my tank, so to speak.
Yeah. No, thank you so much for sharing everything. First off, I want to say I appreciate your honesty about how your time when you were deployed and like you're in these remote locations and like you were just dealing with your time in the Air Force and stuff, that like you ended up going more and more into, your writing for like a sense of like release and like a sense of comfort, like, that cathartic release you were talking about. Because I think there's something really, I don't know, there's something really like almost like beautiful in a way to like, when you're in the face of like seeing organizational um organizations like the military and having to like work in it, and like, these organizations are known for not like committing violence per se, but always like being very aggressive and how they go about their outlooks on life and like their outlooks on how you have to go about behaving. And for you to like see that and to witness everything, and for you to go to like the arts in the sense where it's like you go to writing, it's like almost opposites. It's like the power of like the military, but it's like you're going to the power of the pen, which is something that people don't really talk about but is just as effective. And I think it's really like it kind of shows a lot of depth to like your story when you share the honesty behind how, in the face of like having to deal with the immense pressure and the stress of like being in an organization like this, you turn to something very peaceful and very personal like writing, and that inspired you to kind of stay to it. So I think that was a really great way for you to start your journey, in the sense where it's like you realized how much it meant to you for you to want to pursue this. And like, I think your time in Thailand, like what you were saying, where you took your pause and like you're able to work on just being productive for yourself. Yeah, a lot of people say they want their hobby to be their life, but you're right. Like once your hobby becomes your career, it doesn't feel, some people burn out the way that you were saying it, and they don't feel that sense of accomplishment when they had to do it as like, oh, like if I do a little bit here, a little bit there, I'm not burnt out. It's more of a casual thing. But when it becomes your life, you don't have that opportunity anymore to be like, I got to walk away from this. It's rough. And I think that's also really important, is what you're saying is, if you feel like it's forced, step away from it, because I feel like that's a really big pressure that people feel like they always have to deliver, and that once you start you have to keep on going, and that could be really stressful for a lot of people. So I think you touched on a lot of really important points, with you being an author, that I feel like I've heard a lot of authors talk about, but the way that your story, the way you were sharing it, that was really honest of you, and I really appreciate like the way that you shared that. Like I can tell that that was, a very difficult, yet I can see the rewarding side of it for your journey, where it's like you're where you are now and you're able to say, hey, I'm finishing my third book, I'm also being an entrepreneur, I'm seeing the beauty in this journey as well. So yeah, dude, that's a really great, like, the way that you said that was really worded nicely. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure, man.
Of
Um,
course.
yeah, I mean, I just think that trying to think how to put this is it just the whole author journey. Like I think it really is one of the roads or paths, whatever, less traveled, as they say.
Mm-hmm.
You know, But just at the same time, though, I really just feel like it's just given me opportunities to even just really, learn more about myself and even just kind of like some of the limitations that I have, right? I mean, especially with just, what we were talking about, with just burnout. And it's such a real thing, man, and that's one of the reasons why I came to Thailand to begin with, is just because I was just so burnt out from everything. And just to put it in perspective, I did 7 years in the Air Force as I was a military policeman and a working dog handler. So I trained dogs as well. And after I got out, I did about 3 years of contracting on the civilian side. And with contracting, it was just kind of, and a lot of military people do this. Contracting is usually, it's an easy transition just because the environment is similar. So it's something that like I already knew.
Mhm.
Um, so it was an easy transition for me. But even then, like I got to a point to where um, it was just like I was just working, and really existing, and that was about it. And again, I might add is, during that time, I felt like my writing really just helped anchor me, and it was during that time that I published like my first two books, while working full time and being a full time student. So it was definitely a lot, and just one of the things I realized is just that, like, hey, like, vacations are important. Because for me, like, with just me and my personality type and just how I like to operate, for me is like I just like to like go go go, like I don't really have an off switch
Yeah.
all the time. So like I've kind of, that's one thing I've been learning here, just with my time being in Thailand and just having some awesome mentors along the way too, is just kind of really flipping the off switch on sometimes, right? And like it's okay. Like sometimes like it's just okay to do nothing,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And I think just the last thing I want to add about that too is just I think it's just like American work culture in general, like not even military stuff aside, okay? Like I think just American work culture in general is it's just like that, right? Where like they just expect you to work, and then like it's like, oh, your boss tries to like gaslight you into making you feel bad for taking time off and all that stuff. And then like I come over here in Thailand, and it's just the opposite, where you got like construction workers literally like taking naps in hammocks like on the side and stuff. And it's just the whole in Thailand we just call it like the whole sabai sabai thing, which is just like, it's just like a Thai word for meaning like chill, relax, and that's kind of like one of the that's some of like just the cultural spirit of Thailand in general, is just this whole sabai sabai mentality, right? Because Thais are just like, oh yeah, like it'll get done at some point,
Yeah.
that's it.
Yeah, no, I love that. No, my family's from Fiji, so it's the same thing where like you'll see people just chilling and just having a good time. And it's the complete opposite of like, the work culture in America. And honestly, it's kind of it's a kind of, I'm the same way, where it's like once I get started, I can't stop. And when I see
Yeah.
like the other work culture, I kind of get anxiety from it, from how chill it is. I'm like, yo, like this is a little bit crazy. So I appreciate how like, you're talking about this, because it's so true. Like it's a different work culture, but you also see the importance of the individual self. Like you see a lot more structure for like taking time for yourself to take that nap, or like to enjoy the small things, because you're right, the work will be done. And I think that's the problem, is that like it's so much easier to go to extremes than to find the middle ground. It's either you're 100% efficient, no personal time, or you're 100% personal time, no efficiency. That's like the whole thing, is that you're trying to find a balance. And I appreciate how, like, with your author journey, it's like you're also kind of doing the same thing almost. It's where it's like you're trying to find your own work culture to kind of invest in yourself, but also in a state where it's like you're not overworking yourself or like you're burning out. And I think that's really like I think it's a really relatable thing. I don't think you have to be an author to understand that sense of burnout and to be like, wait, I think I'm doing too much. You know, I think a lot of people can relate to that. So I appreciate that answer. I know you mentioned that you just, you know, you wrote your two books in the beginning of this journey. Like, what was your first book about, and where did you get the inspiration to start writing it? It's, I believe it's called The Nameless War, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Cool.
So, oh man. So, you know how I mentioned about there were some steep learning curves I had to overcome. So, with writing that book, that was one of them. And I'll, in all honesty, I think so. I'm really glad that I decided to undertake that project. But with that being said, like I don't think it was necessarily like the first project I should have done, and I'm not even going to say that that's like my best work either. Um, and just kind of to tell you a little bit about it, man, it's more of like it's a historical fiction slash dark fantasy novel. And really just kind of what inspired me was I read I'm a big Dune fan from Frank Herbert, and I've read a lot of his other books too. And same thing with R.R. Martin. I'm a big R.R. Martin fan. I've read all the Game of Thrones books and stuff, and I was just so I guess I was just so mesmerized by just like how the depth of everything from those stories, right? And just like the immensity of like the worlds that they had created too, and then just like all the lore and stuff behind it, right? Like I mean, I was just utterly fascinated when I read those books for the first time, like all those years ago, you know. Um, and I was just thinking, like, wow, like I want to write something like this, like something similar, but with my own flavor to it, of course. So that's what I tried to do with my first book, actually. And um, it just ended up like it was just a little bit more. I took a bigger bite than I could chew, I think, when I wrote the first book. And I actually ended up rewriting it, believe it or not. And that was a process by itself too. But I learned a lot though by doing so. And what I've been doing now, just with my second book and my third book now, is it's the same series, but it's just not nearly as big as like the first book, right? So they're more like I'll give you an example. Like the my second book, it is a sequel to the first one, but it's more of like a linear story, following really just like one main protagonist. So I think like that was easier to write, and it's just easier for people to follow. And then my third book is kind of the same way. It's basically going to be an anthology novel, based off that same universe. Um, but like I said, with just more short stories, I guess, right? And what I found out later on is that like for R.R. Martin, right? Like, he's most famous for writing Game of Thrones, but those aren't the first books or the first series that he's written. And I found out later on that he had written other books before that too, like completely different universe and all. That were just, they were just smaller, shorter stories. And it's the same thing with Frank Herbert too, right? Like he started with smaller, shorter stories, and then like I guess as they improved as authors, right, they were better able to tackle on those bigger books like Game of Thrones or like Dune or the Dune universe, for example, right? Like where there's more, more of a macro to it, right? And that was just because of all the other stories that they wrote, like for example, Herbert, he wrote a couple of books you've probably never even heard of. He wrote one called The Dasadi Experiment, which is another sci-fi. He did another one called The Dragon in the Sea, which was like a military sci-fi too, all shorter stories. Great stories, by the way. But really, I guess the point is just that, like, they really had like the micro down first, and then they were able to transition to more of the macro for like these bigger stories. Where as opposed for me, like like I hit the ground running with my first story. You know, but I don't feel like at the time that I was adequately prepared or had like the knowledge that I do now to try to undertake like such a large story like I did, you know. So like I said, I don't regret it at all, and I've learned so much by making mistakes, you know.
Yeah.
And really, when I think, and another thing that like I really believe now when it comes to anything, like not even just when it comes to writing book, it's just like when you want to do anything, right? That there's really not like a right time for anything, because there's this expression like there's no time like the present, right? And for me, I think like that's just more and more true like every day.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I totally fell into that same hole, by the way. I'm actually writing my first book right now, and it's the same problem. I was really into
Okay.
I watched Dune, loved it. I'm a big Star Wars fan, loved it. I didn't get into Game of Thrones, but I do love world building. And I decided to write this story about like vampires and stuff, and like it's the same thing,
Okay.
bro, where it's like I'm writing it and I thought I wanted to do like a whole war. I wanted to do like this whole crazy world thing. And then in the middle of me writing it, I'm like, nah, this is really big. And I actually ended up deciding, like, I think it's cool that you pivoted towards doing like an anthology because I also had to pivot. I realized I bit way more than I can chew. So my answer was I actually
Yeah.
cut the book in half. I was like, you know what? If I can just do a half of the story properly, then I think it'll help me write the other half. So I literally just like cut my story in half and I just focused on like the detail because like that's what I really wanted to get down. And I felt like right now I'm writing my first draft and I've noticed that it's kind of like I'm laying down the skeleton, right? Like there's nothing really,
Yeah.
it's just the bare bones where it's like get the ideas out, regurgitate all your ideas, throw it out. And then the next thing is like, okay, well, how do I connect these points? And that's where the immersion comes in that you were talking about that we love in all these stories that we're trying to recreate is like the ease and like understanding like, oh yeah, that makes sense why this character would do that because like you already are used to that world, you understand the science of that world, the psychology. So I think it's really noble for you to also like want to do something like that because it's like I think that's natural. I think when you see people do it right, you can't help but like want to jump into the deep end too because you see how much fun
Mhm.
it is, right? But when you jump into
Exactly.
the deep end, you immediately realize like, oh, like it's really deep, like I don't know how to swim. And I think it's really
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's so cool that you were mentioning that, like, yeah, George R. R. Martin was writing smaller stories. Frank Herbert, he was writing smaller, because people don't talk about that. They always talk about the greatest hits, where it's like this story is amazing, and it gives you that idea to believe, like, wow, this guy must have been so talented. He must have done it just right off the bat. But it's not true. Like you look behind the miracle, or you look behind the greatest achievement, and you see all the failures. You see all the tiny successes that led to that. And I think like for you to say what you just said, I think is a great piece of advice for people that want to create stories like this, which is like, understand the micro before you get into the bigger things. I really liked how you brought up the smaller stories and you're like, these are how these authors experimented to understand, okay, like this is how I kind of want to format things but then I want to make this a grander scale. Um, because I think you're right. It's like, you see some of these amazing stories, you get this belief that it's just a natural innate instinct to be a creative to create these beautiful worlds, but it's really not. Like it's not really natural as much as it's prep and it's hard work to create the ability to handle a world that big, because that's literally what you're doing, is like you're essentially playing god in these, in these stories where your
Mhm.
choices are what dictates what's happening in this world. And I think that's really cool how, like, you were mentioning names of stories that helped make some of these classics that we see as these grand adventures. And I also think it's cool that you transition to like this anthology story where you're focusing on one character, because I think that is a great experience for you to be able to not only just flesh out one character properly, but it also allows you to kind of get ideas of, like, how you can implement this into your next book, and like kind of create a universe off of the individual stories, rather than trying to create like this umbrella right off the bat of like, hey, it has this, it has this, it has this. So I really think it's cool that, like, you mentioned all of that. And my next question was, how did writing your second story help you build on your skill set as the first one? But you essentially kind of answered that, which was like by saying that, like, you realized, to take a more bite-sized chews and like understand, like how much you're like going into, like how to draw a line on how much you want to focus on. That's awesome. Do you see this third book as like, do you see this universe expanding past the third book, or like, do you have any idea of where you want to hit the brakes on this huge story you have going on, or like, where's your inspiration for this? Because it's still cool how you have this huge world that you're building.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, for sure. It's a great question, man, by the way. So right now, what my plans are is so like I said, it's a part. This is all part of a series so far. But with that being said, I am reaching a point to where I'm getting a little bit tired of dealing with this series right now. Like,
Mm-hmm.
in all honesty, so I think after this third book, I'm gonna hit the brakes for a little bit, and there's another story that I've kind of planted the seeds for it already, in a way, just by as far as like actually creating an outline for it this time,
Yeah.
which I'm going to get into that kind of like prep process here in a minute too. But this other story I'm talking about. It would be my fourth book, and I already have a title for it. It's called Fun, which is the Thai word for rain. And this is going to be kind of like, without telling too much. This is going to be a story set. It's going to kind of like a romance slash fiction set in like basically Cold War Thailand. Like really right before the fall of the Soviet Union, I think. And I really just wanted to write something just based upon, or just to draw upon some of like my own experiences living in Thailand and being in Thailand, and yeah, just being part Thai myself, honestly, and just like, some of the just some of like the struggles that like I have to deal with personally, because it's kind of like it's kind of it's kind of good and bad at the same time, being half Thai, right? Because like I kind of can walk between both worlds, right? But at the same time, it's kind of like you're not really accepted by either one of them, I guess, is a good way for me to put it, right? But again, like I really just I want to kind of write that book as a way to just share some of my experiences being in Thailand and just being Thai with everybody, and also giving myself a break too, and just kind of, focusing my creative energies towards something a little different. And then after that, um, coming back to my first series, right? Because like I feel like I've made some really good headway so far with the first series. Like I'm gonna have by summer, I mean maybe late spring, like I'm gonna have three solid books published in that series already. And it took a while, by the way, but my first two books, they're actually doing like a lot better now than initially. And a part of that was also it was I'm really hard headed, and it kind of took me a while to just finally accept that, like, hey, like as an author, like I'm gonna have to spend like probably 90 to 95% of my time marketing as opposed to writing, right? And I think that that's one thing that like a lot of people don't want to do or just aren't really prepared for, because like, just the reality is you're going to have to spend a lot of time on marketing and money as well, you know. Um, but yeah, that's kind of just my plans so far is just, yeah, just really I'm trying to knock out this third book here, and then I'm gonna transition into more of like, I call it more of a fun project with this fourth book that I was just telling you about. And it's kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier is like, yeah, like it's business, but at the same time, like for me, that's a way for me to like also kind of keep it as like a hobby in a way. Like if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely, dude. I first off, like, I think this fourth book is definitely gonna feel more of like a personal. I think it's gonna be more of a personal impact to you because it's about your cultural identity, which I think is a lot of. I think that's a it's a unique problem of the times that we're living in, right? Because of like, a lot of that has to do with cultures, but also like the nations that we're living in. Like I think when you are when you are able to live in two worlds, I think people will look at you weird because you're not able to properly assimilate into one entirely. And I think sometimes that creates confusion for people. Like, I'm Fiji Indian, and like I'm also a first generation American, and like like my parents, they immigrated to America and they had such a unique culture to them. Then they had me, and my job was to not only understand what it meant to be American, but it also meant to understand what it was like to be Fiji Indian, which is already a niche, like, culture. And then on top of that, how do you balance that in America, which is already like probably one of the hardest things to do. And I was born into that struggle. Now, does that mean that I regret that struggle? No, of course not, because it's like it's part of who I am, and it just shows how versatile yet how aggressive, like, cultural identity can be, and it shows how like resilient people can be, especially in times where things are changing and people's identities are becoming more and more, like in this gray area as people are trying to find out who they are. So for you to kind of write a story about that, I think it'll be very relatable to people that have to struggle with that. I'm thinking about like just anybody that is part of an immigrant family. I think anybody that has sat down around a fire, or like sat down around a dinner table and sat down with family, and they share the story of like, I went from here to here and this is what I had to deal with. I think will relate to the story that you're writing about, because to live in two worlds comes at the cost of not feeling complete in one, and sometimes that can create a really big burden for people, and I think that's normal. I totally get where you're coming from, where you say, you're in one nation and people probably don't see you as Thai enough, but then you go to another nation and you're not seen as that enough, and it's like, where do you draw the line? Like, what are you? And the real answer is you are who you define yourself as. And I kind of see that with what you're doing with this fourth book, is that it's kind of like your own stamp in life, where it's like, hey, this is exactly who I am, outside of like me working, being in the military. This is outside of me being an author, but this is also who I am as somebody that is half Thai, somebody that is also understanding the world and how it operates and stuff. So yeah, like I think that's great. Like I really like, I think your journey is a really humble one, and I appreciate how much honesty you share in this journey, because I feel like a lot of people might be a little bit like, I don't know, I could totally see people feeling a little bit more, not embarrassed or ashamed necessarily, but probably a little bit more hesitant to be like, hey, yeah, like I did mess up. Or to say, yeah, like I didn't really know what I was doing back then. Or, maybe this experience wasn't really the best for me. A lot of people aren't able to kind of stand up and say something like that. But what I hear with you is that like your voice is so strong, because it's like you never really sound like your bad experiences brought you down. If anything, it just made you realize you had to wait a little bit longer to see where your next chapter was, which I think is just like, that's just life. You know, I don't think you really get the answers to anything right off the bat. You have to live life to understand where those paths are. And I think it's really cool of you to like kind of share all of that. And I'm really excited. Like I think that fourth book is going to slap. Like I could totally see the passion already. I think it's cool that you're already writing like an outline for it. I think it's cool that, you know, you're already doing the prep work for it, cuz that's kind of like your body's way of saying like, yeah, I think I'm ready to try something new. And, you know, I'm
Yeah,
really
yeah.
excited to see what happens after this third book. And I guess this, you know, it's a curious. I'm curious to ask you this because I know we've talked about so many things, but you know, if you can go back in time to say this to yourself when you were younger, or maybe to somebody else that's starting off their writing journey, you know, what would be like a piece of advice that you would want to give them to kind of make them feel more confident in taking their journey, like at the start of wanting to be an author?
Um, wow, man, that's a deep question there. So, I think there's kind of, I think it's like a, I'll give you like a two-part answer to it.
Sure.
For both like just my younger self, and then secondly, just for aspiring authors slash writers or whatever per se.
Yeah.
So the first thing I would say is the hell with like what other people say, or
Mm.
honestly, just yeah, just the hell with other people's advice. Because like, and I mean, I'm not part of my language, but like, I'm not trying to sound like a dick when I say this, but like most other people's advice sucks. Like, I mean, just to be frank, because I've found myself here, especially within the last couple of years, I found myself, I mean, albeit with some mistakes, of course, like that I've been happier by not following other people's advice because most of the time people, they don't rule for one, they don't really give good advice. And then just like, secondly, like they're giving advice on what might work out well for them, but not for you though,
Mm.
or and then thirdly you could say like maybe they're giving this advice and just trying to like imagine like the best possible outcome for them, or just to feel better about themselves as opposed to actually trying to help you, you know. And look, don't get me wrong, like there are times when people are like when people really do give like good genuine advice. And I think like just as people, like we're pretty good at just naturally being able to like you know to sift out like that good advice from just the bad advice, I guess. But like I said, I've just found myself happier following my own path and just like doing what I want to do, you
Yeah.
know. And there's going to be some good people that come along the way, or like some actually good mentors. And I've been very fortunate here over the last couple of years to have some really good mentors that do give good advice and do actually care about my well-being, right? And even since I've been here in Bangkok now, like I've met so many other like just like-minded people, right? Um, and it's just good to know that it's kind of more of like it's not a you versus me thing. It's kind of more of like a hey, like we're all on the same team here. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like so that's the first part of that. And then just like the second thing I would say, and I've told friends of mine this too that have talked about like they've either said, hey, like I wish that I had taken more time to write, or yeah, I've always thought about writing a story or whatever, whatever, right? And I just tell them honestly, just start writing. you know, like it's pretty simple to me. It's just yeah, just start writing it and then just like figure out the rest of it later. you know,
Yeah.
like I think it's like the biggest thing, and really just with like the whole writing process in general, right? Is just to start writing, right? You're writing for at first you maybe you're just write for progress and not necessarily perfection, you know. And there's like a thing, right, where people debate this among the writing community, right? Like some people say like No, you have to like plan everything like thoroughly and like with every single detail in an outline or whatever, right? And then some people kind of just like I think it's kind of described as like gardening, right? Where like you're kind of just like you're just kind of going with the flow, right? And like you're planning these ideas along the way, right? And then like you'll just come back to it and then just start, just watering it and just like refining it as you go through, your later drafts because you're going to be going through about probably 4 or 5 drafts anyways before you finally publish your work, right?
Mhm.
So for me, like I'm kind of like in between now where I realize like, hey, like you need to have some kind of outline slash planning, right? When when you're writing or crafting these stories. But at the same time, you don't want to be so obsessed with it to where you're sacrificing progress, right? Because honestly, like what I feel like is I'm a man of action, okay? So like I feel like especially when it comes to writing, like at the end of the day, if you're not writing, you're just not getting anything done, and it's as simple as that.
Yeah, no, that's
Whether you have a plan or not. So
no,
yeah,
yeah,
that's my take on it.
dude, I like both of those points of advice. I think you're totally right. I think when it comes to other people giving advice, I think their intention may be well, but I think like when you're really young in the game or like when you're just young in general, I think a lot of people are prone to accepting other people's advice rather than their own instinct. And I think it's when you start developing yourself as a person that you start respecting your own say on things rather than other people's say. And that's not even coming off as a matter of disrespect the way that you're saying it. It's like it's more of like a collaborative thing where it's like the best version of me would be the one that follows my own advice because it's my life and it's how I want to go about things. And I think when it comes to like the arts and stuff, I don't think it's really that easy to give proper advice to being creative. Like you can't really explain how to be creative. It's usually something that you kind of have internally. What your job is to learn how to express it. So you could teach people like, hey, this is how you could start expressing it. But I'm not gonna teach a painter how to paint, and I'm not gonna teach like a like George R. R. Martin how to write like a fantasy novel. That's their thing.
Yeah.
But like I think what you're saying, which is like, well, then how do you develop the ability to do the things that we see that are like beautiful landscapes of like art and like beautiful worlds to immerse yourself in? What's to like it's by doing it, which is why I like your second piece of advice, which is like instead of thinking about what other people are saying, if you just locked in on your own craft and just kept on writing instead, you'd probably come out with a much better result to criticize or to like work off of than other people's advice, but not really writing anything because of it. I think like the more that you develop like in terms of your own art, the more you're able to work on it and improve on it. So I think like those both points I think are really important because I think there's a little bit of delusion that comes into the idea of like entrepreneurship in general, I think is a very delusive act where it's like you have to go into it expecting something to be created even though it's not there right now. People will call you crazy because it's like, I have an idea for writing a story, like it's like you're writing your first book, it's about a nameless war. The idea hasn't been conceived yet. Like sure, there's other stories about wars and stuff, but not the way that you're writing it. So you kind of have to feed into your delusion to believe that this is a story worth creating, and then once it's created, then your delusion becomes reality because then it's like, yeah, it's real, like I wrote it. So I think, like everything that you've been sharing with your story and like your process with writing to where you are now in Bangkok, and like you're trying to explore different avenues of writing and even also working your own development as a person, it kind of highlights this message where it's like you grow as your craft grows. It's not a one-sided thing where it's like, oh, I'm going to stay the exact same, but I'm just going to be a better author, or I'm going to change as a person, but my writing style is going to stay the same. You have to fluctuate. There's always going to be an ebb and flow where it's like you learn something about yourself, then later on you learn something about your writing style. You learn something about your writing style, you internalize that, and it makes you more confident as a person. It makes you a better marketer because then you understand how to market your own words. And like, I think that journey that you're saying right now where it's like 90 95% is like marketing, entrepreneurship and stuff. These are the ultimate truths of like what it is to be an author. You know, in today's world, people love highlighting the fun stuff where it's like, yeah, I go to the convention, I talk to all my friends, or like I'm doing the panels and stuff. But then it's like when all the cameras are off and nobody's paying attention, what do you have to do? You have to get on the website, you have to put your book up, you know, you have to like start talking to people, you have to create merch if there is merch, you have to do newsletters, social media. And like that's something with BookBase that, you know, that's something me and my co-founder Elias, like we struggle with that as well to this day, because it's like you know, technology is growing so fast. The ability to get a hand on
Yeah.
it, to be able to like say like, hey, like I gotta create content here, I create content there, it's not an easy thing. So it's like I think that's really honest of you to say that, you know, you are going to be marketing more than you're probably going to be writing, because once you create a product, like it's up to you to make sure, especially if you're taking the indie route, it's literally just you to try to like go out there and try to market what you got going on. So no, I think this was just such a great interview, and I thank you for coming on here and like sharing, you know, the truth behind your story and stuff. I think it's incredibly brave of you to like, you know, start off by going to the US Air Force, you know, and working with canines and like learning everything out there in the world and realizing that wasn't your tempo. And then you moved to Thailand, you realized, you know, being with your parents in a remote area, not your tempo. You moved to Bangkok, you're an English tutor, but like you're also finding more about yourself throughout the journey. I think you're definitely going down such a healthy path. You know, I think this is how a lot of people should look at life, where it's like you don't really measure life by the ups and downs, it's by like the length of their time just working on things, you know. And the intensity might be a little bit crazy at some moments, but in general, if you could just keep on going, that's what matters. So yeah, thank you so much, Will, for like just getting on here and just really sharing that story about that. And you know, for anybody that's interested in continuing and like following Will's journey, like please check out willsolomonauthor.com for his website, and you can see his books there. Check out Will underscore Solomon author to keep up to date with his journey with writing and stuff. But Will, like thank you so much for being on to this, you know, this book based interview and just, you know, sharing your story.
Oh yeah, for sure, man. And as always, thank you for having me so much. It's been a pleasure.
Of course.